This is the Tapped In Podcast, the podcast for beverage distributors that want to empower their sales team to drive business results. Welcome back to the Tapped In Podcast. I'm your host, Bud. I'm here with Mikey. Mikey, how's your day going?
Well, good so far.
Good.
Yeah. Nice to be home. So day's going a little bit slower than it has been being on site.
Yes, running and moving on site for sure. Well,
yeah.
Thanks for coming back, everybody, for listening for another episode of the Tapped In Podcast, Sales and Strategy for Beer Distributors. What we wanted to talk about today is about the cost of pickup and exchange of all your close of code and out of code, and how it can be dragging you down emotionally. Maybe it's a very sad subject for some of us, right, Mikey?
It could be.
Maybe this is just why are we doing this still? Or how are we spending so much money on it? Or maybe you're like, I'm not sure. I haven't documented how much it is or don't know in detail how much it is. So we've seen all different kinds of levels of clients and wholesalers and their complexity and sophistication in tracking this. So we thought this would be a good subject to kind of go through. So Mikey, with your operational experience, let's go first. Let's go with how to track, and we start with how to track in the trade.
Yeah, absolutely. Tracking is so important. If we're not tracking, how do we know what's going on? How do we paint the total picture? And how do we hold people accountable for neglect and or abuse when it comes to FPL? So tracking is crucial. It's a pretty simple task to just get in the route accounting system, whether you use VIP or Encompass. We were an Encompass wholesaler, so I had a report saved that went by route. Then it showed me each reason code for the amount of finished product loss that came off of that route for the month. And then it showed me what products, so that we could track and see where it was coming from, what it was, and the codes being used. And our codes were super tight too, so we didn't want to have a whole lot of backdoor. But
yeah, we guided people to what we really wanted them to use for sure. Those reason codes are things that we use strategically, not just in tracking and measuring from the cost standpoint, because I would always look at it from the P&L and what were we looking at from the profit and loss statement from a total global cost. And then you were looking at it from a transaction level detail, and the reps were looking at it from transaction level detail too, of what they were actually bringing back out. And when I say transaction level, that for the crew, that means the invoice level detail, actually what happened all the way down to the invoice. And that level of detail, it can also be used strategically around what are the returns and who's, not just people, but maybe who from a supplier or from a brand is not performing the way we need it to. And we would kind of log that in our dinosaur brain and have that as a discussion point at ABPs and at new product launch times around hey, these are things that why elements of quantities of what we're going to order and forecast for, and here's why. We had that data to come back to and look at. Absolutely. And really kind of talk with the reps, and not just talk with the reps, talk with the supplier reps about it. Because ultimately on our skin.
Yeah, and properly too, we can also look back and see styles. I mean, sometimes when we launch a style, we don't really recall how that did, but we could really go back and look and say, all right, well, you know what? Historically, reds just don't work, or historically browns don't work. And this is why. This is what we brought in, and this is what we tried, and we had great execution. But on the back end, this is what we brought back, and this is what we ate. And ultimately, we really didn't make any money off of this style or brand or whatever it may be, even package. Well, with no tracking, there's no way to know any of that.
Reds don't work anymore because it doesn't taste like Red's apple ale.
Where were we when that got brought up?
I'll take a red. That's a real life story. I'll take a Reds. I'll take a Reds. Well, this doesn't taste like apple.
Yeah. supposed to be a red ale, and they thought it was red apple ale. They
It doesn't taste like an apple. Yeah, and then when a supplier talks to us about, hey, we'll give you 50% of the cost back. Well, a traditional beer shippier's margin is somewhere around 26 to 29%, depending on the state and kind of the ebb and flow. And some on certain craft brands or certain local brands, or even some, big, malt beverage brands are lower just because the GP per CE is so high. So some of us are willing to kind of lower that margin standpoint. If we still get back, so what that means, if we get back 50%, these are loose math, kind of back of the envelope. If we get back 50% of that cost, that's great, but it moves the loss, if you think of like a student, from being like a zero, I didn't take the test or the exam, and that's going to really impact my grade, and I got 0 points or $0 back, to like a D minus. Because our margin is still 26 or 29%, and we're getting 50% of the cost back, we're still behind the curve by about 20%. So it's still costing us a decent amount of money. Now, on the flip side, suppliers' margins are pretty healthy compared to ours. They're running in the 40s and 50s as a gross margin on a regular basis. So at least some of the biggest of the bigs, not everybody, but some of the biggest of the bigs. So that gap is much narrower, and they're spreading their risk across, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of retail outlets, where we're any single wholesaler has much less of an account based universe. So don't get lulled into that sense of like, I have a safety net. You've got a little bit of a safety net. And remember those conversations, like I think about Tyler as one of our old DMs, who was like, I'm going to argue with you now because I don't want to argue with you later. And then we did that. We did that. I think it was like one of the first runs of, I don't remember what it was. It was one of the first limited order windows, and he calls us back like 12 weeks later. And it's like, hey, can you take some product off of these other wholesalers? And I'm like, no, bro, we're out. Like, we've run out as expected. And I'm having and I told you, I'm going to have the argument with you now at how much we ordered, so that we don't have to have this argument. He's like, you remember that? And he's like, yeah, I know. I'm sorry, bro. And it's just,
Yeah, and I feel like that conversation happened more than once, with different DMs.
for sure, for sure. So, Mikey, did we track this in the warehouse too? Not just in the retail with reason codes, but in the warehouse too.
Yeah, absolutely. So everything, anything related to finished product loss, no matter where it came from, had to be tracked. We had to have a paper trail. We had to have a story to tell. Not only a story to tell for our supplier partners, but also a story for us to tell internally and to learn from, um, moving forward with different packages, and things like that. So yeah, track. We need to have a paper trail. We need to be able to quickly pull it up in a report, and see what's going on in our route accounting system.
So once we have the reason code set up, and once we have the tracking, and if you have already have those set up, maybe you got a couple bit of inspirations about how to you start to utilize it. What we love to do is we like to actually expose the reps to this information in the form of finished product loss. FPL is what we call it. So think of it as like the governor. We want to grow profits and we want to grow volumes. Managing finished product loss to the downside is the cost saving philosophy here, is that we want to be the governor to not do dumb shit. And what does that look like? That looks like how many and where. So, how many cases am I selling and where am I selling them at? And that kind of prism or view of the world is incredibly complex, because how many and where for a big brand like Bud Light, Coors Light, and Miller Lite is much different than a small brand like Deschutes or 192s of New Belgium, or a small local regional craft brand. But you want that governor out there so that we're not growing volume or putting cases in to grow into perpetuity where there isn't going to be sell through. It's still our inventory for the large part, because we have a code date process until a consumer takes it home and drinks it. So in one way, shape, or form, we're still on the hook for it, and we got to manage that and be more efficient and effective about it. So, Mikey, when we're showing this to the reps, what's that start to look like for them?
As far as the calculation, we're looking at a cents per case, which is a really good way to track and to measure essentially the cost of the item or items that we're picking up, laden costs, versus our dollar sales total for the month to see. I mean, that way it shakes out so that it doesn't matter how large the route is or how small the route is. It's a good source to track everybody apples versus apples. So yeah, cents per case, and I want to circle back really quick because we kind of skipped over about reason codes, but why are reason codes important, and what reason codes should we have, and what reason codes should we not have?
Yeah, that's a great place to go next for sure. So a lot of times we look at reason codes as out of code, 100% of retail out of code traditionally, because that's something that has been left to die or has died and is kind of like a boo boo or a problem. Um, you know, think about egregious problems in my book are like out of code 24 packs of a big value brand, or a 30 pack of a big value brand like Bush or Keystone, or Bud Light, Ultra, Miller Lite, Coors Light, all that stuff. Like those are like things that like should never go out. Basically, with good rotational processes and diligent sales processes like that, those are things that should never be problems. Much of those brands should really never be problems at all. The things that become problems is that goes back to the how many. Like, are we selling too much? Are we chronically selling too much? Do we have a display that is too big or not effective? So that is number one. Number two is then close to code. So close to code is something that's usually got 14 to 30 days, 35 days. Just depends on every distributor's different philosophy buying close to code and how much life is left on it to move it in back into the warehouse. So that becomes a reverse logistics question. So reverse engineering the sale. So we got to pick the product up, bring it back to the warehouse, re-inventory it often, and then reship it out to somewhere else. Typically a big chain store or a store that has high velocity around that item so that it will sell through and get moved on. So there is a cost component to that. So that's why we typically see clients, and we did 60%, I think, Mikey.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, I see everywhere from 25 to 50, 60% of the cost.
In reps will say like, hey, why do we track it at 50%? And it's like, well, good on you. I'm bringing it back and diligently tracking it, because that is the reason why you took a shot to sell this item, or maybe you got behind the eight ball because something happened with the sales trends in this store, or you maybe built a little bit larger display than you needed to, and you took your shot. Well, you're gonna get accounted for half of it, because there has to be a value cost in that reverse logistics. Picking up the product, bringing it back, and moving it back to another account is another. It's basically two delivery cycles. It's one delivery cycle out the door. Well, it's three in total. It's one delivery cycle out the door, one delivery cycle in reverse, and another delivery cycle back out. And every time us as beer distributors touch product, that's cost. We're spending gas, labor, and time and materials in the actual hard goods of the trucks and the wear and tear on the vehicles. Those are all things that we want to have one way street out the door as efficiently and effectively as possible with nothing coming back. If we can do that, that grows our profitability per drop and grows our profitability for operations as well. So that's why we account for it as 50%. Then we kind of break down into a couple different other customized tools, because you can name these reason codes, whatever, right? So you can name them however you want to. So then we kind of break down into, hey, are we doing a return for reset? Are we doing a breakage? Are we doing that? I don't see a lot of people using breakage, Mikey, from a retail trade standpoint. If you live in a state and you're running a distributor in a state where breakage is illegal, or you're not supposed to pick up breakage, that would be something that would be reasonable to track, because then that keeps the reps from actually bringing that breakage item back, and they have that difficult conversation with the retailer around like, hey, you broke this, or your customers broke this, or consumer broke this, like this needs to get fixed. For Michigan, we could bring back breakage. We never tracked it. What do you think about that, Mike, here in terms of tracking breakage or not tracking breakage for the reps?
Well, we definitely tracked it. We just didn't hold it accountable
Yeah.
on the compensation side. But yeah, tracking breakage is pretty good. Really, basically to see if there's any abuse going on, right? If I have a customer that's continuously bringing back breakage, why? What's going on? And then also, whenever we have a code that is outside of outdated, close to code, that really has no accountability behind it, it opens up a back door. So we have to be really careful, right? We have some checks and balances going in there. So whether you're tracking breakage or not, if you have a breakage code, we have to track that to make sure that it's not being used as a backdoor for outdated beer. I.e., I'm a sales rep. I came across a couple cases of something that has gone outdated. I don't want to be held accountable for. I send it back as breakage because I punched a hole inside one of the cans, or I ripped the handle off, or I did whatever I needed to do to get it back in. Having that, that the safety gate at the warehouse, whether it be at the dock, whether it be in the warehouse, whoever's checking in trucks, to be able to go in and change that to the appropriate code, is crucial. And also coming back to some sort of management and saying, "Hey, I've noticed this is getting sent back as breakage, but it's really outdated."
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, I think that's crucial. But yeah, back to your original question, tracking breakage. Yeah, for sure. We don't want to just be able to send something back without any sort of tracking on it. Now, whether or not the rep is being held accountable from a compensation side, I think that probably determines how bad is the problem. Is it a state where you can pick up breakage no matter what? Is it a state that you have to swap it out? And what's the severity of the problem? And that's where I would start with that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great feedback too. We did have some tough conversations with some retailers that had chronic breakage issues, and were like triple the average or quadruple the average. And if you have the data and you can run analysis around it, these are things that you can utilize to have that, data back discussion. I always come back to having these difficult discussions with a retailer, with a supplier, with a backbone of data, because again, it sucks the hot air out of the room. It sucks the egos out of the room when you've got stuff documented. And it can be more like, hey, like, love you, hate you, annoyed by you, don't like you, all those things. When you have resources and data at your fingertips, you can kind of really manage around how to discuss this difficult topics with whether it be a retailer, an employee, a team member, or a supplier partner as well. So once we've got all the reason codes all set up and we're tracking this, how do you see reps seeing this information and actually making decisions in the field on this information and starting to interpret it? It's one thing to show it. Now, what's first level is tracking it. Next thing is to show it. Now that we're seeing it, how are they starting to interpret it and actually make decisions on
Yeah, it's there's a couple different ways. So if I'm a rep and I'm out and I'm looking at a close to code item, and I know that only 50% of that cost is going to go towards my FPL, I want to do everything in my power to actively move this, right? At VXP, we track everything as a team. FPL is tracked as a team. There's no pressure like peer pressure, and when you're on a team and one guy's dragging everybody down, everybody else is doing everything they can to help them out. So if I'm having some issues in my account with a few packages, it's getting close to code, um, rather than sitting here and letting it go out of code, coming back and saying, it just didn't work, whatever, knowing that 100% of that cost is going to go to my FPL, I'm going to move it. And I'm going to go to my team because my team is not going to want their FPL to slip as well. So, hey guys, I have, 10 cases of Mike's logger about ready to go outdated. I really need to move it. I have 2 weeks on it. And then, Bud pipes up and says, yeah, I can run through Bud's quarter mark over here and we'll get rid of it. That team effort really helps. And by exposing, the costs associated with this, putting some compensation towards it, it really opens up the eyes to most reps of just, oh, I send it back, oh, we get credited for it, or hey, when I send beer back, there's really no repercussions. It exposes, the business side transaction of there are costs associated with it, right? And we're losing money. And how many? I mean, you used to have this down to a T. How many cases of if I throw one case of beer out the window, whether it be outdated or breakage, and it's gone, how many cases of beer do I need to sell it or sell to make up for that one?
Yeah,
If
it's usually like 15 to 25, depending on the style of package, because of profitability on like a Bush Light, you're going to do more. You're going to need more to recover from that, and the
yeah,
profitability on a craft, that's 10 or 12 bucks a case in profits. You're going to need to do less. You need to have less repack stuff.
absolutely. And I think I mean, that's crucial about looking at it like that way. We use that analogy a lot. That's a great way to look at it, and then also cents per case too, right? When we start breaking that down and tracking it cents per case as a rep to know whatever it is, maybe 5 cents or whatever the severity of the problem is, of every case of beer I sell goes to just throwing beer away. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a big calculation as well.
I talk about it with the teams that we meet with around this is a cost we have to contend with, like a labor cost or fuel cost or benefits, 401k, healthcare, all that stuff. It's a cost. The business is going to bear this cost one way or another. Say, and you as a rep, you want more money, you want to make more money, you want better health insurance, you want a better phone or a new phone, like a better car. Those are all costs, and the business has amount of resources to spread around to those costs. And this is something that we as sales teams can potentially have an impact on, and actually have more of an impact than we'd like to think we do. So if we can drive this cost down, that means that we can reallocate those resources, that new profits that's dropping to the bottom line in different directions, into wages, into benefits and other, in making the business more sustainable and other things that a beer distributor needs day in and day out. Now you talked about real quickly like compensating around this as well. So how do you like to explain the bonus structure to a rep so they can start to understand the pros, the bonus, and the growth of the bonus if they do a good job, and the sad and the decline of the bonus if they don't do a good job managing this as a team.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do some sort of budget. People that track FPL, a budget style compensation to where if you hit your budget or under your budget for your FPL, you get X amount of dollars. If you go over, you get nothing. We track it cents per case with a target. For instance, if we did a target of 2, if your FPL is at 2, you get 100% of what we have bonused. You bring it down lower. That's obviously creating some cost savings for the company. The company is going to share in those cost savings by increasing your bonus, so to speak, for FPL. You come in over that number. We're higher than 2 cents per case. We're still going to compensate you, but not as much because now we have added costs. And then there's always a max. There's that protection of, all right, well, if our target's 2, our max is 4. Anything over 4 cents, you're not getting a dollar because we're losing. So that's exactly how I explain it. Is, hey, this is a bonus to help the company save money, and the company is going to share in that cost savings with you. Right now, here's our target. That's where we really want to be at or below. If we have a bad month, we're not going to go out and just throw everything out the window and completely clean our market. We're still going to make some money by controlling the costs. So, yeah, I mean, explaining it like a bonus structure is definitely.
Yeah. It's a very organized way to think about it is you make a little bit more. If target is 2 cents a case, budget bonus or the bonus for the rep at 2 cents is $100. You bring back a penny a case, you make 150 in that example as a rep. You bring back 3 cents a case, you make 50. In this example, you bring back 4, you make none. So, that carrot in the upside, being like, hey, let's help out, let's work for the company, let's bring this cost down. There's a carrot, the stick in the other direction And we used to be all stick back in Atlas. We were saying, hey, let's if you bring back 20, we basically said 20, 25 packages make up 80% of our volume. This is kind of archaic, more old school thinking. You're going to eat 100% of that cost of the FOB from the rep, where actually you take it from your account. And that cut our FPL down considerably from where it was to where it settled then. And when we made the move to cents per case in the VXP and the method that VXP preaches and utilizes, we actually cut it by another 70% or something like that when it settled out all. And because it was carrot and stick, we got the reps engaged into basically saying, hey, we'll eat all the cost on the long tail of the portfolio. You eat all the costs on the highest volume part of the portfolio. And when we expose them to everything and the reasons why and the method of the madness, we drove everything down. We drove the biggest volume players down in the right way, and we drove the long tail down the right way as well. Because it's a solid governor, and I've seen it work. I love it. That's why I'm obsessed with it. So other things, Mikey, along that line is that resets, returning resets, it's almost always a discussion that comes up with every client or every onsite and every rep. What am I supposed to do with trade returns related to resets? So obviously you can use the reset reason code to kind of curtail, quarantine those returns out. You said something when we were planning this. You've heard that more and more reps and retailers and wholesalers are actually talking to retailers around like, hey, bro, we're not picking up this reset here.
Yeah, I've noticed that trend. I mean, resets are a nightmare, right? I mean, we're not for the most part.
That could be like a series of episodes.
I know we could go on and on about resets, but a lot of times when we're resetting a chain account, we didn't have the control of the products that were in there. Um, and obviously we didn't want to have empty shelves, and we probably couldn't move it out before the reset came if those items were getting deleted. So, I mean, historically, we just pick it up, right? If it's a full case, some instances, maybe if it's not a full case, and then it's on us to resell it. But I have noticed a trend the last four, maybe five clients that I've been out with that are not picking it up and having the retailer use maybe a discounted shelf or a discounted area pod, maybe to run some of that beer through. Now, I know some states it's illegal to pick it up, but in the states that it's not, holding the account, like saying, hey, I can't bring this back. It's against state law, it's against policy, whatever it is. Maybe we can find a way to discount this. But yeah, I've noticed that to be a growing trend. The wholesalers really don't want to take that back and then have to fight with it. Sometimes it's pretty short coded. We don't have a whole lot of time left on it. So yeah, I hope to see that trend grow and more
For
people.
the wholesalers. Yeah.
Absolutely, and save some costs, and run it through the retail account, hopefully at a discounted rate too.
Well, it's a reasonable thing to ask and to kind of focus on as an industry and retail partner too. The retailers used to doing that with items that they have shipped through their own network of logistics too, where they're doing delivered to stores. When they do their resets around things that are not DSD. So think about, the pharmacy aisles up and down the streets there, and where they're getting that delivered direct. Basically anything other than carbonated soft drinks,
Cereal,
beer,
I have some experience with the cereal side, and yeah,
cereal
that's
side. Yeah. Yep. When they reset those items, that's like, hey, you're gonna do a discount or a blowout or an end cap or display feature, some way, shape, or form. Get those items blown out so that they're not here. And the challenge that's grown in the beer industry around some of these packages, like if you're in a market and you got these packages in these chains, like that's the only place that it really sells them with any kind of velocity or any kind of reasonable velocity. So when you get an item DQ'd, bringing it back as a wholesaler can be a real challenge to then resend it back out because that 12 pack might not move anywhere else. So there's limited velocity in the independent channel to move that item. So you, those are good I always talked about it. We never really figured it out at Atlas how to pressure people or pushing it, people in that direction either. So it's interesting to see the business move in that direction. I know it's difficult. We, from experience, know that's a tough conversation to have. It's also a reasonable conversation. And in
Absolutely.
that, and in that mode, we are coming into reset season, or we are hot already in the middle of reset season. What are you seeing in the trade, Mikey, when it comes to resets? Sorry, get it. Can you sneeze? Can you hear her sneezing?
I could hear, yeah. Bless
No. You okay over there, Munchkin? The jet of
my dog's going through some serious allergies right now too with spring, but
she's sneezing away. So
yeah,
back to the
but
pot.
I look back to fall resets from last year, and that was our first glimpse into the Bud Light debacle. How
Mhm.
is that translating into retail and shelf space? Obviously, we know the sales are down, but the retailers taking that space and shifting it over. And the answer is yes in the fall, and the answer is definitely yes in the spring. Is it all going 100%, from Bud Light over to Miller Coors? Not so much. Coors Light's definitely expanding space, but we see it mostly in the import and huge with Modelo, Corona. Um, so yeah, I mean, if you were to take your shelf sets from spring 2023, compare them to 2024, you're like, what's going on? This is a crazy world, to have that kind of change, that kind of shift in 12 months, is pretty crazy.
Yeah. What do you think the percentage is showing up? I have no data to back it up. I'm just
I have
wondering.
no data either, but I mean, just by looking at some of the chain sets, larger grocery stores, I mean, I would have to take a guess that that's a 30% swing out of the Bud Light space over, and then that's on top of what we saw in the fall, which was probably 20 to
Yeah.
30%. So we're seeing that Bud and Bud Light space, primarily Bud Light, cut in half, if not more, at most accounts.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that season is upon us. It is coming up. It is something, the rational side of me says that they understand, the market understands that it is kind of like the nature of the beast. And there are a lot of SKUs in that core portfolio, being Miller Lite, Coors Light, Bud and Bud Light, that is a little overly complex. I always make the joke of like, Yingling, or the markets that are Yingling, like they have like 7 SKUs and they do just fine. And do we really need the 14 or 18 or 25 SKUs of Miller Lite, Coors Light or are we just confusing the consumer? I know pack size is something that other consumer CPG markets talk about, but are we just confusing the consumer in the CPG world for beer compared to other CPG categories? So that's my 2 cents on it. It's moving in the right direction. It's moving in a rational direction with the market, and we're seeing ultra pickup space. We're seeing Coors Light pickup space. We're seeing RTDs become rationalized around what they have for space as well. The big players, the cream is rising to the crop in a lot of places, and then is craft getting hit still?
Space wise, I think that they're either losing or staying the same in most
Net
places.
neutral to
Yeah,
slightly.
net neutral, if not lost a few placements, but
Yeah. And the import brands, like you said, Modelo, Corona, just on fire. Will
yeah.
continue to
And
be on fire.
we've watched the craft space slowly disappear over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, seeing that neutral loss right now is probably a good thing.
Anything else on your mind, Mikey, for today's episode?
Today's episode, no, I mean we talked about reason codes. But we didn't really talk about having too many. So I would add that, you don't want to have 15 reason codes. One reason code for what you need, and that's it. Not a ton, not
Yeah.
one for everything.
We don't need an exception for every single example out there in the world. And the reason why you talk about that is that we need to centralize the research project back down into one or fewer codes. Because if it's too many, then it kind of looks like it's death by a thousand cuts, and maybe it doesn't look like that big a deal. But if you centralize it down into 4 or 5 really smart, really organized codes, then you can really kind of pick through and look at the brands or the packages that are coming back, and that tells you the nuanced story that you might want to tell with that other reason code or 12th reason code or 15th reason code as well. Just like you said earlier, right for kind of misapplication. If you have too many, you can misapply them or mismanage them. And then also kind of clutters up the data research when you need to look at it in more detail too.
Absolutely.
Well, good stuff. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back with another episode soon. Cheers.
Cheers.